Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. This Saturday is UFC 293, Israel Adesanya versus Sean Strickland for the middleweight title. And this is one of the worst UFC pay-per-views of 2023. It goes down on September 9th in Australia. And we are going to go through the entire pay-per-view main card, briefly discuss each fight, and then at the end of the video, I am going to grade UFC 293 on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being the worst pay-per-view ever, 10 being the greatest pay-per-view of all time, and I'm going to answer the question whether or not it is worth your money. Should you purchase this pay-per-view? Now, if you're interested in any of my other UFC 293 content, I will link my entire playlist down in the description, including my full card predictions, but also I do a video like this for every single pay-per-view, so if you're interested in that, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Now, before I get into anything, I'm going to show you the entire pay-per-view main card for UFC 293. Take a brief look at it and then comment down below what grade would you give this card on a scale from 1 to 10 before you even hear my opinion. Now, how do I grade a UFC pay-per-view card? There's 3 factors I look at when grading a UFC pay-per-view that are most important to me. 1, is the fight relevant to the division? Is it a title fight? Is it a contender fight? Is it a throwaway fight? Next, on paper, is it a stylistically fan-friendly matchup? Is this going to be a fun fight? Do I think it will be a fun fight? And also, how skilled are the fighters? Are they bottom of the barrel fighters, barely in the UFC, or are they the elite of the elite? Those are the 3 most important factors to me when looking at different fights on a UFC pay-per-view card. Now, starting off with the fight that opens up the UFC 293 main card, it is Tyson Pedro versus Anton Turkalj. This has no business being on a UFC pay-per-view main card in 2023. This is like a prelim opener at best. This is a light heavyweight fight. It really has no relevancy to the division. It's basically a throwaway fight. Tyson Pedro lost his last fight to Modestas Bukauskas. You know, Anton Turkalj has yet to win a fight in the UFC. He's on a 2-fight losing streak. He came off of Dana White's Contender Series. Now, I do think on paper, this is a fan-friendly matchup. We could get a crazy KO. We could get a brawl. You know, the pleasure man, Anton Turkalj, you know, he really comes to fight. Even in his first 2 UFC fights, he was game. He got absolutely mauled by Jailton Almeida, which is crazy. He even took that fight on short notice. And then his last fight, he fought Vitor Petrino. He had a decent outing. He wasn't terrible. And I don't think either one of these guys are like the worst fighters on the roster, you know, but they are very low level. They still have okay skills. They're not, you know, Juliana Millard-esque striking or anything like that. But this fight really belongs on the prelims of a card. And honestly, this would be like a barely a main card fight on like a UFC fight night. I understand why they're doing it. Tyson Pedro, they want to put him on a main card at UFC 293 in Australia, in his home country. But this fight really doesn't belong here. But overall, it's an okay fight. I'm not dying to see it. I don't think either one of these guys, at least anytime in the near future, is going to propel up the UFC 205-pound division. Both guys are still kind of young, especially Turkalj. He's only 27, so he can improve. There's still a lot of room for improvement. But right now, it has no relevancy to the division. Moving up on the card, we have a heavyweight bout. Justin Tafa versus Austen Lane 2. The rematch after a fight that ended in a no contest. Now, this is a fight that I am looking forward to. I think this will be a fun fight, especially with the heavyweights. You know, we usually get at least a crazy KO, bare minimum, but sometimes these heavyweights, they have no cardio. Now, we don't know that yet about really either guy substantially enough. Like, how are they going to perform in terms of cardio if there's not a KO? But this kind of is relevant to the division. It's really not. That's a bit of an exaggeration. But the heavyweight division is so shallow in terms of skill level. If one of these guys goes out there and puts on a crazy performance, if Austen Lane puts on a crazy performance and gets a nasty finish, next thing you know, he's fighting a top 15 heavyweight, because the heavyweight division's horrible. And guys like Austen Lane, who's coming off of Dana White's Contender Series, the guy looks the part. He's 6'6", has an 80-inch reach. He's massive. He's super athletic. And he's kind of a newer breed of heavyweight. I think they'll try to propel him right up the heavyweight ranks if he goes out there and let's say he KOs Justin Tafa. So this fight on paper should be a fun fight. This fight on paper is mildly relevant to the division. You know, I say mildly because it's really, I mean, both guys are unranked. Do I think either guy is going to be potentially be a champion? I don't think so. But really, I could see either one of these guys creeping into the top 15. The top 15 of the heavyweight division is just abysmal. It's just an absolute disaster. But overall, I think this fight should be on a pay-per-view card. I don't mind it being on a pay-per-view card. But overall, both guys, as what they've shown so far, not the highest skill level. And again, the jury's still out on guys like Austen Lane, but you have Justin Tafa, who lost a decision not that long ago to Jarrett Vandera. Need I say more? So it's a heavyweight fight that should be fun, somewhat relevant to the heavyweight division. And, it's not a super low-level fight, but with the heavyweight division, the skill level is already just a low barrier to high skill level in the heavyweight division. But I'm still looking forward to this fight. I don't have a problem with it being on the pay-per-view main card. Moving up on the card, the featured fight on the main card, Manel Kape versus Felipe dos Santos. Man, the original fight was so good. It was Manel Kape versus Kai Kara-France. Kai Kara-France had to pull out of this fight with a concussion. He couldn't make the fight, and I'm so disappointed because that was a banger of a flyweight matchup. Now you have Manel Kape, who's ranked in the top 10 of the flyweight division, who looks like an absolute killer, who's on the verge of a title shot, and now he's fighting a guy in Felipe dos Santos, who's making his UFC debut, and he's 7-0. Let's look at some of the competition that Felipe dos Santos has fought. 5-0 in his last fight. The fight before that, 5-2. The fight before that, a guy who was 2-2. A fight before that, a guy who was 5-0. And a fight before that, a guy who was 6-1. So very inexperienced for Felipe dos Santos versus a Manel Kape who's been around for a long time. He's 29 years old. He has an 18-6 record. And in his last few fights, he's looked very, very good against David Dvorak, Zagas Zumagulov, and also Ode Osborne, flying knee KO'd him. Of course, he has losses, but they're not the worst losses. Matthias Nicolau and Alexandra Pantoja, who's the current UFC flyweight champion. So in a way, this fight is very relevant to the division because Manel Kape, close to a title shot as it is already. And if Felipe dos Santos goes out there and beats Manel Kape, where is he going to sit in the rankings? He's going to have to get ranked. We've seen this before where guys come in on short notice and, beat a ranked guy and then get ranked. We've seen Steve Erceg, do that in his last fight against David Dvorak. So that was super impressive. So it is relevant to the division. Felipe dos Santos, though, very inexperienced. I don't think he's super high level. The jury's still out on that. Manel Kape, obviously the elite of the elite, very good fighter, top prospect at flyweight. So I'm mildly looking forward to this fight. I'm looking forward to seeing Manel Kape fight. I think I'm just super disappointed that we're not getting the original matchup against Kai Kara-France because that fight was an absolute banger. But on paper, I think this fight should be fun while it lasts. I think Manel Kape's probably going to get an early finish. But Felipe dos Santos, he's good in the clinch, has nasty standing elbows, has nasty knees in the clinch. And also, he's going to come out with nothing to lose. So if he can go out there and somehow brutally KO Manel Kape, throw it all on the line, throw wild winging shots and clip him and finish him, his entire life is going to change. He's going to be ranked in the top 10 of a flyweight division off of his UFC debut at 8-0 if he was to get this win. So I kind of like this fight. It's just disappointing we're not getting the original matchup. Moving up on the card, the co-main event, we have Tuivasa versus Alexander Volkov, another heavyweight fight. I like this fight. Should it be co-main event? Probably not, but it's not a horrible co-main event by any means. Tuivasa is always fun to watch. He's so much fun to watch. Dude just goes out there and looks for brutal KO after brutal KO, but he's in a slump right now. He's lost his last two fights. He got brutalized by Sergey Pavlovich in his last fight, and he made a quick turnaround to fight Sergey Pavlovich after getting absolutely decimated by Cyril Gane. So Tuivasa on a downslope, and now he's taking on Alexander Volkov, who I believe is kind of underrated in the heavyweight division. His only losses have been to some of the top-level competition in the heavyweight division, Tom Aspinall or Cyril Gane, and he had a decently competitive fight with Cyril Gane. So I think this is a good fight against, of two guys who are ranked pretty high in the UFC heavyweight division, and I think it's a fun stylistic matchup. I think on paper this should be a fun fight. Alexander Volkov, very well-rounded, but I think he's going to strike with Tuivasa. Tuivasa, we know what he's going to do. He's going to come out, throw haymakers, look for nasty leg kicks. Overall, I think this is a fun fight that's super relevant to the division, and really it should be fun on paper. Are they highly skilled? Yes, I think they're highly skilled. Tuivasa, I think he's a bit overrated because in the heavyweight division, you can get away with a lot of skill deficiencies based on power. And Tai Tuivasa has been able to do that. You know, Tai Tuivasa almost got finished by Greg Hardy not that long ago. And Greg Hardy rushed in after rocking him, got KO'd himself. So it's kind of weird, especially it's very hard and weird to judge the skill level of certain heavyweights because the division, their skill sets is just so vastly different than other weight classes just because they rely so much on the power. But overall, I like this fight. I don't have a massive issue with it being the co-main event. I don't feel like it should, like, especially in a card this week, I feel like it should have a better co-main event. But nonetheless, it's a decent heavyweight matchup that has, you know, decent ramifications in the heavyweight division. Neither one of these guys is going to be fighting for a title anytime soon. But with the heavyweight division, you never know, especially with the turnover that may happen soon. You have John Jones versus Stipe Miocic. They may both retire after that. And then the division kind of opens up. You basically have, you know, Cyril Gane, Tom Aspinall, and Sergey Pavlovich at the top of the division. So whoever wins this fight is going to be in a very good position. And Alexander Volkov won a 2-fight winning streak, and he's only 34 years old. And I know that sounds crazy saying that, but for the heavyweight division, that's not bad. And for Tai Tuivasa, he's 30 years old. So he's got a long road ahead of him depending on how his chin holds up. But overall, I like this fight. It's a decent co-main event, just not the greatest co-main event. Moving on to the main event, we have Israel Adesanya versus Sean Strickland for the UFC middleweight title. You know, I feel like this fight is getting an extremely bad rap. And I've kind of been guilty of that as well, just because what it could have been. We should have been getting Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis, which is a fight all of us wanted to see. We all expected it after UFC 290. Dricus going out there and just destroying Robert Whittaker, and we thought, okay, that's the fight. We're going to see it. Dricus couldn't make this timeline because he has a foot injury. So instead, we get Israel Adesanya versus Sean Strickland, which is a fight that a lot of people don't perceive as super competitive. A lot of people think Israel Adesanya, you know, his skill set is just a really bad matchup for Sean Strickland, and I agree with that. So this main event is just kind of a letdown, you know? Now, do I think Sean Strickland's a good fighter? Yes. I think these are both high-level fighters, but there's levels to this game, and I think Israel Adesanya is at such a higher level than Sean Strickland, and I just think Adesanya is going to go out there and outstrike him. So I don't think this fight's super competitive. I don't think it's going to be like amazing on paper. I think Adesanya probably finds a finish in this fight. But also this main event, the way Sean Strickland fights and the way Israel Adesanya fights sometimes, it really has the potential to be a snoozer. You know, both of these guys have had their fair share of snoozer fights. And, you know, when you match them up against each other, maybe it's going to turn into a barn burner. Maybe it's going to be crazy. Maybe it's going to be super competitive. But on paper, it just doesn't seem all that interesting. I would have rather them done a different main event for 293 and booked Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis down the line. But overall, I don't hate Sean Strickland getting a title fight just because he was the most deserving contender over Dricus du Plessis. He's on a 2-fight winning streak. He beat Abus Magomedov in his last fight, finished him. Fight before that, got a short notice win against Nasruddin Imavov. But also you have a loss to Jarrett Cannonier last December. And I know that was a razor close fight, but Jarrett Cannonier looked really good against Marvin Vettori. I know he got clipped up a couple times, but I think that version of Jarrett Cannonier poses a larger threat to Israel Adesanya. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you, oh, Israel Adesanya versus Jarrett Cannonier 2 was the fight that I was clamoring for. But for me, what gets me so excited for high-level fights is the perceived level of threat. And for me, Jarrett Cannonier is a higher perceived level of threat for Israel Adesanya than Sean Strickland. So I almost would have rather had that fight. But I understand fresh matchup in Sean Strickland. But I just feel like this main event falls flat. I just think it's disappointing. And I just think it's one of those matchups, of course. Can Sean Strickland go out there and shock the world and we'll be having a whole totally different conversation on Saturday night, you know, after the fights or Sunday? Yeah, of course that can happen. But it's just so unlikely. And stylistically, this fight could end up being boring. And it just feels like we should have waited for the Dricus du Plessis fight. So this main event for me, it's like losing points just based on that. You know, is it two high-level fighters? Yes. Is it relevant to the division? Of course. It's for the middleweight title. But overall, it's just kind of disappointing matchmaking, and it's a disappointing kind of throwaway title defense for Israel Adesanya, in my opinion. Now, overall, how good is UFC 293? I think this may end up being one of the lowest graded pay-per-view I've done on the channel, because this card is just, I mean, it can make, a lot of cards can make up for themselves by having like a crazy good main event. Like if Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis was main eventing this card, it would lift it up substantially because that is a banger of a matchup. But overall, looking at this card, I mean, there's just not a lot of great fights. I mean, if I had something, if I wasn't running a channel, if I wasn't a die-hardcore MMA fan, I would really probably think about skipping this card. But overall, I am going to give UFC 293 a 2 out of 10. There's no fight here that I'm super compelled by. Without the main event, and I know that's a big if, but without the main event, this isn't even a good fight night card. This isn't even a good fight night card. And to ask for $85, that's how much it cost in the United States. It's $85 to buy this card on ESPN Plus. I just think that's a massive ask. So I do not think this fight card's worth your money. Unless you're a massive Israel Adesanya or Sean Strickland fan, I would recommend skipping this card, honestly. I wouldn't buy this. You know, if I could watch it for free, I probably would. But if you're just kind of a fringe fan who's kind of in and out for certain fight cards, I'd miss this card before I paid $85 for it. Of course, I'm going to watch it. I'm going to be live streaming it on Saturday night if you care to join me. But overall, I think this is a solid 2 out of 10. It's just super disappointing. It's super uneventful, and it lacks compelling fights. So I'm just kind of disappointed with UFC 293. If it had Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis, honestly, I'd probably give it a 5. Probably, maybe a 4.5. Maybe a 4.5. Let's not get too carried away. But it just doesn't have that compelling fight that you must see. Like there's fights like Khamzat Chimaev, Paulo Costa. I mean, I think that fight's better, almost better than this entire card. As crazy as that is to say. Islam Makhachev, Charles Oliveira 2, that's such a compelling matchup. I can't wait for UFC 294. There's not one fight on this card that I can point at and tell, I don't want to say casual fan, but just say fringe fan who's a fan of the sport but can miss events. There's not one fight on this card that I can point to and say, you cannot miss this matchup. It just doesn't exist, so I have to give it a low grade. Let me know what you guys think of my grade down in the comments. Am I too harsh on UFC 293? It may still deliver some excitement, but let me know what you think. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for watching.